Hello, everyone. We are live from the attic. Welcome to the live stream tonight. Welcome to Piedmont Trails. My name is Carol. I'm excited to be here with all of you, and I'm excited about tonight's topic too. The live chat is up and running. I can see it and say hi to me. Let me know that you're here with us. Join in the conversation, comment, talk amongst yourselves. Um, we have got a lot of material and a lot of resources to cover tonight, and I'm excited about this. If we always encourage you all to share the videos, um, click the like button if you like them, comment, make your comments. I'll try to reply to them as quick as I can, and also subscribe to the channel. We're working very, very hard to try and obtain a goal of ours of 1,000 subscribers by spring of this year. So we're trying very hard to get to that goal. But we really, really are very thankful for all of our subscribers. We really appreciate all of your support, each and every one of you. You all motivate us so much in what we do, and we appreciate that. During tonight's stream, hi Rick, I see you. I hope you and your family are doing well this evening. It's good to see you here. I will stop often throughout this program tonight, and I'll stop and I'll look and see if you have comments or questions, or and reply to your comments. So just be sure and let me know that you're here and everything. I do have news that I want to share with everyone before we get started. There will be a new edition on the website starting tomorrow, and the website is piedmonttrails.com. This will be from the Colonial Indentured Servants Project. This project has been going on for about 2 years now, and the website will provide names of the indentured servants that we have been able to prove so far. What colonies are they from? They are from Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and New York, and New Jersey. So look for those. How can you get to that? I'm going to tell you how to do it. When you go to PiedmontTrails.com, click on the little icon that takes you or says Colonial Indentured Servants Project page, and just click on it. And once you do that, the names will appear right there on that particular page starting tomorrow evening. Okay? We're excited about that. A new article will also be completed about the Loyalists versus Patriots project, and that will be coming up through this week. So look for that article by Friday on March the 6th. We have uncovered some amazing discoveries about the Piedmont families during the American Revolutionary War, and ran across a few surprises. So, of people that I thought were definitely loyalists turned out to be patriots, and then there were a few families who I thought were patriot turned out to be loyalists. So, stay tuned. We've got a very interesting article coming up at the end of this week on that. Also, our next podcast will be available by this coming weekend, and it's all about Halifax County, Virginia. Um, Tons of resources and a lot of surnames, early surnames, will be associated with that particular area on that podcast, and they'll be coming up towards the end of the week. So let's get started with tonight's program. I want to first, like I said, I want to thank all of the new subscribers and everyone who has subscribed to our Piedmont Trails YouTube channel. And I want to thank you for joining the journey with us. Thank you all so much. You are part of our motivation to just keep going and working hard and striving to try and find all the records. And I really appreciate each and every one of you. I really do. Tonight, I will be sharing nearly 100 surnames of people who lived along the Catawba River in North Carolina. Our time frame is going to be 1740 to 1770. We have a lot of material and resources to cover, so here we go. The Catawba River originates in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. It flows primarily east for a little while to Hickory, and then it starts traveling south, going through Lake Norman to Rock Hill, South Carolina. Tonight, I will be discussing the North Carolina sections and the early settlers from 1740 to 1770. The Catawba River was in the path of one of our oldest roads in North Carolina, and that road is Thigpen's Trace. If you've read some of our articles on the website, or I think I've mentioned that a couple of times on maybe a few videos, but Thigpen's Trace dates prior to the Great Wagon Road, dates prior to the old trading path that runs through North Carolina. It is, in fact, what I believe to be the oldest road in North Carolina. This road was developed as a military route during Queen Anne's War between the years of 1702 and 1713. Technically, the war broke out in 1701 in North Carolina due to control of the lands and trade and the goal to reach the Mississippi River and own all of those lands by British rule. After further study, I now believe that the plans for Thigpen's Trace was to travel through North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia and go further to reach the Mississippi River. However, the original route seemed to end in Georgia. Roads encourage settlement. I've always said that. You've got to have a road to get to a new place. Roads are important. So knowing that a road existed traveling to the Catawba River in 1703 tells me that early settlements in this area need to be investigated. The Catawba River is so named, and let me back up on that. We are currently investigating even earlier families arriving to this area, and I'll get more in detail on that here in just a little bit. The Catawba River is so named for the Catawba Nation. It's a native tribe first visited by De Soto's expedition in 1540 and again by Pardo's expedition in 1566. Both of these explorers referenced the people living in this area as Iswa, and I'll spell that. It's I-S-W-A, Iswa. Leaders change throughout time, and this is true with Native American history as well. More study is needed to capture the absolute truth to verify if the Iswa tribe are the ancestors of the Catawba tribe during Queen Anne's War. Trade became important to all parties involved, and as John Lawson makes his way to the area, he records this truth in his journal dated 1709, and I'll quote, "We reached the Catawba," and he spells it differently, so I pronounced it the way he spelt it. "We reached the Catawba and stayed at the king's house. We met a John Stewart, a Scot, from the James River in Virginia. He has traded here for many years and wishes to travel with us," unquote. John Stewart did end up traveling with John Lawson's expedition, and he travels with him for several days. But here's my question. How many settlers arrived to the Catawba River before 1740? And how many of these families stayed? You know, land records and tax records and most of your material paper records, they're not going to exist for these families. This is not what you're going to be able to prove these families that they were here. But it really makes one wonder how many of them arrived early. This is one of the topics that Piedmont Trails is currently we're working on. We're investigating this all the time, and not just in this region, but all throughout the colonies. And it's interesting on some of the information that we have found. Early families who may have negotiated deals, and I'm going to start this over so you can hear this. Early families who may have negotiated deals with the Catawba and the Cherokee, like the early families of Eastern Tennessee did. We did a whole segment of Eastern Tennessee settlements and how some of the people negotiated deals with the local Native Americans living in that area for their lands. And this is very possible in the same scenario as the Catawba River area. Very possible. We have determined several families so far. Hint, hint. But tonight I will share data from 1740 to 1770. So look forward for more information about what we have discovered and what we're currently working on in that area pertaining to that. All right. If you visit PiedmontTrails.com and you enter Catawba, Catawba, in the search tab, several articles and other data will appear. Among the first is a two-part segment discussing the early settlers along the Catawba River between the years of 1744 and 1750. One article that I had written goes back to 2019, and then the second article dates to 2020. I wanted to mention these tonight to share more sources and records that we have on hand and to also share with you how loyal we are to our research at hand. New discoveries are made daily, and after we share these 100 surnames with you all tonight, just know that the journey continues as we travel back to the past. The trail never grows cold. It is constantly moving to preserve our history and the lives of the people who lived here before us. The 100 surnames mentioned tonight are in order, but they're in order per time frame, per decade. For example, the first batch is 1740 to 1749. The second batch is 1750 to 1759, and then so on until 1770. After 1770, population in North Carolina, the population then explodes. It's it's hard to explain how many people had arrived in North Carolina after 1770. It's a very significant number. And we'll save some of that data and the reasons why so many flocked to the western sections of the colony for another live stream, because that's a whole subject in itself. But back to 1740, colonial news travels fast. And everyone knew that vast lands were going to be available in North Carolina. They knew it. Colonial investments were primarily concentrated on land, personal possessions, education, occupation, and natural talent. Land offered a quick leap with colonial status, and with hard work and dedication, a family could prosper greatly by utilizing the land and its resources. But land was also a business. It was a business venture. In acquiring hundreds of acres, one might divide the tract and sell it to newly arrived families. They could easily make a profit by doing this. And some of the surnames I mentioned tonight did this very thing. In fact, some of the surnames that I mentioned never stepped foot on their land near along the Catawba River. At times, I'll stop, as I said, as I read out all of these listings of names, and I'll share some details and I may share some notes about that particular individual. So we're going to get started with 1740 to 1749. First thing that I want to mention is one individual dates to 1738, and that is Henry McCullough. And the reason why I want to bring this up because he is deeded 60,000 acres of land that reach to the Catawba River and crosses over what they call at that time the Catawba Trading Path. And this was issued to him on June 24th of 1738, and that was 60,000 acres. Now, he is a land agent, for those of you who are not aware, and many of his lands were confiscated during the Confiscation Act after the American Revolutionary War. But I wanted to mention him first because he dates prior to 1740. Okay, first one is Harris. Last name is Harris, and then first name is Tyne. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about Mr. Tyne Harris. And there's a couple of reasons why I'm doing this. 600 acres are deeded to him on September 13th of 1749. He's located on the north side, South Fork of Catawba River. And there are several lines of Harris surname that existed during this particular time frame. John Harris from Pennsylvania, who was a well-known trader in that area, migrated to North Carolina. And he could be a possible relative of Tyne Harris. James Harris from New Jersey, who also brought with him relatives Samuel and Robert Harris. William Harris, who was born in Virginia, who arrived in North Carolina at this time, served as a colonel in the Continental Army, and later on in his latter years, gold was discovered on his property. In fact, the Western Carolina newspaper, which was being published in Salisbury during that particular year, recorded that. And I believe that was in 1825. He was originally buried in Chisholm Cemetery, which is in present-day Montgomery County, but he was later moved to the Old English Cemetery in Salisbury in Rowan County. Lastly, Richard Harris, who was born in 1728, could be a possible relative to Tyne Harris. He was born in Virginia. He migrates with several of his family members during this time period. Early churches also shed light on the Harris surname, such as Steel Creek Presbyterian Church, Old Rocky River, Rocky Spring Meeting House, Rocky River Presbyterian, Poplar Tent Presbyterian, and many, many, many others. Another possibility of a relative is Colonel Samuel Harris, who was born in 1724 in Hanover County, Virginia. He was a colonel of the militia. He was also a captain of Fort Mayo in Virginia. So that means he was prevalent and pretty important during the French and Indian War. He was ordained as a preacher in 1769 and he died in 1795. I'm giving you these examples because this is an example of how I work and go through records and discover families and their links and lineage and relationships to one another and determine how they traveled and where they lived and how they linked together, if they linked together at all. So I wanted to go in more detail with Mr. Tyne Harris on that to give you an example of how I do that. Okay, the next name on our list is Peter Elliott. Peter Elliott was issued 150 acres on October 7th of 1749 on the north side of the Catawba River, about 3 miles below Price's land. And you'll also find more about Peter Elliott on the website if you'll punch in his surname. John Cathy was issued 800 acres on the north side of the Catawba River on October 7th, 1749. And you'll find more of him on the website too. James McDowell was issued 400 acres on Rocky Creek, joining Catawba River on September the 30th of 1749. John Clark, very interesting about John Clark. He was issued 1,000 acres on Clark's River, South Fork of Catawba River on October 7th, 1744. Now, the actual grant was issued in 1749, but his surveys were completed in 1744. And the descriptions on his surveys clearly state Anson County. Well, Anson County was formed in 1750. The land offices in North Carolina for these lands opened in 1745, but this is proof that deals were being prepared before county boundaries were assigned. Anson County became a county, and also before the land offices were even opened, per se, and before legal surveys and grants were being issued. John Clark. Okay, Edward Givings, 270 acres on the mouth of Dawson's Creek and south side of Catawba on September 30th, 1749. Robert Runex, and I'm going to spell that last name as Runax, issued 175 acres on Catawba River and Leapers Creek on September 30th, 1749. Samuel Davis, 579 acres, issued September 20th, 1748. And Dennis Daly issued 1,000 acres along Catawba River, and I'm going to quote the deed, the actual land grant in this case. And this is a description that it was given. Between Catawba Town and the settlement by the Pennsylvania people. That was the exact description given on the survey, and I'll read it again. 1,000 acres along Catawba River between Catawba Town and the settlement by the Pennsylvania people. This is the exact description that was given. Okay, we're going to move on to 1750, and I'm going to do these surnames and keep it rolling. I'll stop every now and then. The others, I don't get into much as detail, but these are all verified first and last names of people who owned property along the Catawba River waterway. Okay, starting in 1750, Edward Bole, last name Bole, Robert Seaford, Robert McCaffin, Samuel Wilson, Edward Griffin, Henry White, Evan Lewis, George Rennick, Rennick, Samuel Young, Thomas Farrell, Nathaniel Alexander, Alexander Osborne, Jacob Cooper, William King, Thomas Reynolds, George Davidson, William Sherrill. I have a lot of information on William Sherrill, and there's a whole article dedicated to him on the website. Henry Potts, James Larimore, Martha Pickens. This is the only woman that was issued a land grant during this time period in this area. She's the only one. She was issued 514 acres on the Catawba, and she's the only woman that I will mention tonight that was given a land grant. She is closely linked, it just hit me, so I'm going to share it with you. She is very closely linked to the John Clark family. Okay, Matthew Wilson, Hugh Waddell. He's a colonel who supervised the construction of both Fort Dobbs and Fort Catawba. And there was a Fort Catawba. It just never did come into being, but it was started by Governor Dobbs, and Hugh Waddell supervised the construction of that. They worked on it for about 4 months before they ended it. Henry Lights. Continuing with 1750. David Templeton, Thomas McHoney, and I'll spell the last name Mchonney, John Butte, Henry White, Laurel Coburn, Andrew Lambert. This particular individual, his actual name was Andreas. He was a Scotchman, and he can be found immensely in the Moravian records at the Southern Province in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. You can find a lot about Andreas Lambert and his family among those records. Continuing with 1750, Preston Goforth, George Cathy, Robert Ramsey, Robert Harris, William Patton, Thomas Harnell, John Little, Robert Harris, Robert Leopard, Robert Feening, John Carr, William Price, Andrew Wilson, John Armstrong, Charles Beatty, William Dickey, Frederick Hamright, Samuel Haywood, Thomas Walker, Matthew Pattaw, and I'll spell the last name as it was recorded on the document, Pattaw, James Armour, Jacob Summerman, Robert Palmer. Continuing with 1750. Adam Snyder, James Moore, Christopher Grice, Adam Moore, Samuel Neely, John Haynes, Conrad Mull, John Oliphant, John Price, Andrew Woods, George Rutledge, Andrew Nat, John Sharp, Andrew Nolan, Lawrence Schuyser. Those are from 1750. 1760. Leonard Saffiret, and I'm going to spell this last name as Safferet. William Bigham, John Scott, Lawrence Kaiser, Christian Acre, Francis Beatty, Archibald McLean, Frederick Hambright, Nicholas Leeper, Francis Nickel, William Dixon, John Neal, John Knox, Peter Mull, James Adair, James Bigger, Henry Downs. We're going to continue with 1760. Everybody still with me? Okay. Thomas Walsh, Henry Moyer, Thomas Campbell, Jasper Hoover, John Hagan, John Baird, and I'm going to spell that last name for you, Baird. Martin Coltex, Moses Ferguson, Robert Cook, Hoseas Black, James Torn, Hugh Berry, William Reed, James Craig, Thomas Gerald, Patrick Jack, Aaron Steele, Ulrich Crowder, Michael Whitnor, Thomas Rainey, Benjamin Pennington, Peter Labont, William Cleghorn, Samuel Humphreys, John Hill, John Sloan, Bartholomew Johnston. The Catawba River looks very different today than it did in 1750. Martha Pickens, whom I mentioned as the only woman receiving a land grant during the 1750 decade, sold her property in 1774. And it happened to include a particular waterfall along the Catawba River. A great portion of these families, they moved south to Waxhaw Settlement. And this first phase of moving occurred during and after the Cherokee uprisings between the years of 1759 and 1761. Later on, families in large groups migrated west to Tennessee and to Kentucky. There are many, many reasons why a great number of these early families that I mentioned tonight didn't stay along the Catawba River. Also, to take in consideration of the reasons is politics and the economy played a major role. Governor Dobbs appears more in a negative light versus a positive light on these individuals during this time frame. And these early families, in the onset of new taxes and new rules, did not set well with a majority of them. The colony seemed to persuade many to just move on instead of dealing with these new taxes, new rules, and Governor Dobbs and everything that was changing. It wasn't the same as when they first settled it there. When you research individual families, the clues make themselves known, and you realize how certain situations affected certain families and how that same situation didn't affect other families. It didn't affect them at all. It was priority for North Carolina to be in the same group or class of other colonies compared to South Carolina and Virginia, as far as their exports and as far as their population and their natural resources. But the economic results from the French and Indian War and the Cherokee disputes and the previous Tuscarora War, North Carolina was just continuously fighting an uphill battle on all of these aspects. And this trickled down to the families. By the time of the Battle of the Alamance occurred in March of 1771, many of these early families had already moved. They had moved elsewhere. During the war years of the American Revolution, another phase of migration occurred, both in leaving North Carolina and in new families arriving in North Carolina. The 1790 decade witnessed another phase, but for the most part, families were putting down roots for good in North Carolina after the American Revolutionary War. The Catawba trading path in the old remnants of Thigpen's Trace provided the perfect elements to entice these families to settle along this particular river. And this is also true for the Yadkin River, and it's also true for the Dan River. It's also true for Hall River. You will find these early roads. In fact, Thigpen's Trace went right by Hall River. So early roads play a very important part in the early settlements, and they entice the families to settle there. So, what did the early families pretty much experience there along the Catawba River during these early years? Well, they would be subject to hearing sounds if they lived close to the river of roaring rapids. Catawba was a roaring river. And they would also be accustomed to the sounds of bells tied to horses by the constant travel of tradesmen making their way on this main trading route to trade with the Catawba and the Cherokee. They would hear bells on the horses. They would also be witness to small individual forts that dotted the landscape. This was proven time and time and again by improvements of their lands that they would build these, and they would do this in order to protect their property and their close by neighbors. There are many, many, many small family cemeteries that are located all along throughout this area. Um, Church records and personal journals and other materials guide the way as we get closer to the old home sites of long ago. And I want to say, too, that there are other families that require mentioning tonight. And let me go ahead and get that in there, too. And that is the Perkins family, who was related to the Sherrills, and they actually traveled together. We've been able to prove this now. And the Perkins family was actually living along the Catawba River with the Sherrill families close by during those very early years and during the late 1740s. We also want to mention the Irvin family, that's Ervin, the Abernathy family, the Long family, the Fry family, the Fry, the Barclay family, the Wilfong family, and I'll spell that one as Wilfong, and the Huffman family. Now, due to the 13 dams that have been constructed all along the Catawba River today, many of these original home sites are now underwater. But if we all strive together, we can assure that these families will be known in the future. And this is what Piedmont Trails is all about, is just preserving the past for the future generations so that these families these hundreds of families that I've named tonight, they won't be forgotten, and they will be known that they did own property in the western sections of North Carolina. That was the western edge of civilization at that time. And they did, own property. It's not to say that they all lived there, but they did own property there. All right, I'm going to share some of my sources with you that will entice you to research further. One of my main sources that I used tonight was the Barnwell Hammerton map of 1715. I'm trying to think, can you find that on? I know that you can find that at the North Carolina State Archives. And also what I used as far as maps was the Moseley map of 1733. I used also the Catawba Nation, which is a book written by Charles M. Hudson. I also used A New Voyage to Carolina, which is the journal by John Lawson. It dates to 1709. I also used Carolina Cradle by Robert Ramsey. If you don't have that book, you can find that entire book online now at archive.org. It is an invaluable resource for early families who settled in the Piedmont area of North Carolina. I also used the Granville District and its Land Records by Thornton W. Mitchell. I also used Records of the Moravians. I used Volume 1 by Adelaide Fries. And I also used particular records that were obtained through the Moravian Archives location, the Southern Province, located in Forsyth County. I also used the Southern Frontier of 1670 to 1732 by Verner Winslow Crane. Okay. I also used Sketches of Western North Carolina by C.L. Hunter. And I also used information obtained through the North Carolina land grants, surveys by Henry McCullough and William Churton. And I also used portions of correspondence between from Governor Dobbs and also Governor Johnston during his time period in North Carolina. Okay? Okay. All right. This marks the end of tonight's live stream. I hope that some of the surnames you guys are able to connect with. That'd be awesome. If you do, let me know. Let me know that you connect to them. And if you have more information that you would like to share about any of the surnames that I mentioned, feel free to do so. I'd love to hear from you. I really would. But this marks the end of tonight's live segment. I wanted to share a book that I'm currently reading. I just got this book. It's brand new, but it's called I'm going to hold it up here, Our First Civil War. And it's by H.W. Brands. It goes into patriots and loyalists in the American Revolution. And I've read 2 or 3 chapters of it already. But I can already see it's going to lack the detail for me. And what I'm searching for and what I was hoping that it would have in it. Maybe as I get further, it'll have more detail in it, but I've been discovering so much detail in North Carolina now, and I'm a little disappointed in it. So we'll just leave it at that, and then maybe I'll continue reading it, and then I'll see where we go with that. At any rate, just stay tuned to our Loyalists versus Patriots project as we uncover more and more details about what really, really was going on in North Carolina during those war years. It's amazing to discover that. We're going to also have more news on the Great Wagon Road project, and that'll be coming up later in March, towards the end of the month in March. I want to thank you all so much for joining me this evening. I've greatly enjoyed it. I love sharing what we learn, what we find. I could talk history and genealogy all day if someone would let me. But I've really enjoyed sharing this information with you. Our next live stream will be March the 27th at 7:30 p.m. right here on the Piedmont Trails YouTube channel. And remember to click like and share if you like what we're doing. Comment, share it with your friends. Invite your friends to come over and check us out and see if it's something they would be interested in. And don't forget to click that subscribe button. We're really working hard to get to that spring goal of 1,000. We're working hard on it. Rick says, thanks. Awesome as all. Thank you, Rick, for your kind words. I really, really appreciate that. I really do. Thank you. Okay, so March 27th is when I'll see you again, unless I pop back in here real quick. But until then, always know that our ancestors left an amazing trail to follow. And the most important thing is to enjoy your journey to the past. And thanks again for joining me, and God bless.